All right, thanks for joining our training today, Drupal development with CiviCRM Entity. It's just a continuation of the training series. And last week we covered initial setup of and settings and configuration of CiviCRM Entity and some site building examples. And today we're going to dive into a little bit of code so that we can customize our site further. If you're new to CiviCRM and Drupal and want to get a basic code base set up, keep this updated about monthly, and you can use it as closed repo, run composer install, and you'll have your code base. It has all the goodies that are like Drupal integration modules, CiviCRM Drush. We also have an composer extension to manage CiviCRM extensions. And maybe in the future, I'll do a webinar about Composer and setting up Drupal. If anybody's interested in that, let me know. Maybe a good topic. If you're unfamiliar, the project page is here. And this is where you can make issues, bug reports, feature suggestions, things like that. New development happens on GitHub, although just because it has for the past 10 years, so why move it? And if you want to contribute a fix, a feature, anything, then feel free to fork the repo and make a PR. You'll get reviewed. I've gathered up some code examples and scenarios, so we'll be I've documented that, pushed those to a repo, which people can see, and it's there for you to review and look at now if you'd like, as well as there's a VBO, a views bulk operations plugin example, which we'll touch on at the end of this. So these contain helpful bits of code, and I hope illustrate how you can do many things with your site. So you're a developer, you're ready, you've got CiviCRM Entity, and you want to do some custom modules. It's really one thing that you want to learn first is like in your Drupal module, you may need to use classes, objects, methods that are in CiviCRM itself. You need to be able to bootstrap Civi enough to where those objects can be discovered. And the CiviCRM core module itself provides this CiviCRM service. And you can run the initialize method, and that will bootstrap Civi to where you're able to, this command here is just an example of one way to derive the contact ID of the logged in user in the CiviCRM way. That is that super handy. So if you can combine your CiviCRM API, all that stuff in your Drupal modules and do both things. And you can include the CiviCRM service in other services or other objects using Drupal's dependency injection, which we'll show an example of in a little bit. So beyond that, CiviCRM Entity itself provides a wrapper around the CiviCRM API. This is API version 3 that it wraps. And if you're in a situation like a hook or somewhere where you don't have dependency injection, then you can load this service from the Drupal service container. And then it's pretty much very similar, like Git is the API Git action. You put your entity type just the same, and then your array of parameters that you pass to the API. In this case, it's like give me the contact with ID 3. So you would get all the details about that. Now this service here automatically is calling the CiviCRM service initialize method that we previously showed on the last slide, so that you can see that it is used, and you don't need to like load two separate services, load two separate things. Depending on the order, it's like if you needed to use CiviCRM API objects and things, but you needed to do it before you make your API call, you can load the CiviCRM service and initialize first, and there won't be any conflict there. as to the order of things. I do want to touch on just a moment what is dependency injection and its usage. So in Drupal, you can fetch services from the container a number of ways, and in this we're getting the container here and loading it up, preparing it, giving it for the object. Now there's a little more to it if you're doing a raw service, and just because field plugin base, which is a Drupal class, already has that coded out for what that is, and we'll look at a few other examples of things as we go through this presentation. So when the object is created, it's fetching the API service, and then we're initializing here, and then we're doing our action there. And I'm going to cover this particular thing a little more in a moment. So the next step is we talked about all the entity types that are integrated with CiviCRM Entity. And by default, we have all these different types. And we talked about last week where you can decide if you want to enable Drupal view pages, add or edit or delete forms or not. And there are a lot of defaults for each of these entity types. And everything is, the code is the documentation, and you can see that all in the supported entities file of the CiviCRM entity repo. So here for contact, look label, CiviCRM entity label. So contact, this matches, this is the actual word that we're seeing here. It says contact here. Now, perhaps we'd like to change that. Maybe from a Drupal user interface perspective, we want something different. So if you look, I did that here with events. So instead of saying CiviCRM events, it says CiviCRM trainings. And to achieve that, in my demo module, I implemented a hook, which anybody can implement in their custom module, and that's hook CiviCRM alter Drupal entities. So this, so supported entities has the initial starting point, and then it broadcasts a hook. It says, hey, all modules or CiviCRM extension. So you can implement this hook in a CiviCRM extension if you choose. Rule of thumb, if it's like CiviCRM only or native code, I would do it in an extension. If you're using Drupal API and things, then do it in a Drupal module. So you can see here this line, and this is where I changed the CiviCRM entity label to trainings. So I'm going to find this CiviCRM event. And so we're altering this property right here, and we're just changing the name so that we see the trainings there. Now, it's common that we want to have the view pages for events perhaps be accessible to more people. And if we look at what the default is, you have to have view event info permission to view. And that may be fine. Maybe you don't want to give that permission, because that would also give access to the CiviCRM pages. Just perhaps you don't want to do that. Perhaps you want to do something else. So in this, I just made it, I changed the permission. Notice that I do an array here and not just the string. So this could be this can be multiple permissions, and these are the permissions in Drupal. And access content is the same permission you would need to access any node, which is generally given to authenticated users or even anonymous users, so they can just view the site's content. So in this case, we want to publish the event because we want anybody to be able to see information about the event. We want to do the Drupal version of those pages. So we do this. Now, after you implement this hook, you need to clear the Drupal caches so that everything takes effect and go. We often do that with like states or provinces too. If you just want to be able to see like a country or state label, or this may not even be so much to see the actual pages themselves, CiviCRM -country/ country ID. This may be viewing a referenced country in some other context, or maybe your node references a country or your contact or in a view. So super common to do, because usually a state or a country is not like a revealing any secret information. So you can add entity types. So there you're not limited to this set. You could also remove them. So if you don't want to manage all these entity types that come with it, you can just remove them. So you could just CiviCRM Info, and if you didn't want contact, you could put CiviCRM contact and just unset it, and that would remove it, and then the CiviCRM contact integration would disappear. Obviously, if you have views, other functionality that rely on it, don't remove them, but it can be done. And that will make it completely disappear from the settings page. Like it just, Drupal would not be aware of it whatsoever. So note that. In this example here, we had a custom entity type for a client, and it was a voucher system. And one of the entity types was a voucher campaign. And so we integrated that with Drupal so that we could use Drupal views and things along with the CiviCRM functionality that was there. So it's really not hard to do. It does have a few requirements. You need to have an API 3 entity. So it is possible to have only API 4 and not API 3. So like your entity construction kit is API 4 only, and it takes a little work to make an API 3 wrapper for that. So that out of the box, your entities, when the entity construction kit wouldn't work. But if you have an API 3 entity with get fields and create actions, to delete too, if you want to delete things through Drupal. Then you need a ID column. It assumes there's an ID column which is standard for all of these. If you look in CiviCRM contact table, there's an ID, and that's your contact ID. So this is the label that people would see, similar to how we changed it for trainings. And then this is the CiviCRM entity name. So this is the name of the API entity. So if you go to like an API Explorer, then you can find out what those are. It's also a handy tool, API Explorer, where you can construct API calls and prototype things. So this word here that shows here, these are the different API entities. So you can use any of these. Not every single one of these is integrated with CiviCRM Entity. So a fun test of this is to pick one that's not there and integrate it with CiviCRM Entity. Then you can make a view of that data. This is the table name. And notice that this you don't need this. This is optional. We added this to be able to have a differing entity type name. So this is the machine name of the Drupal entity type in this index right here, CiviCRM _ voucher _ campaign. But perhaps for some reason, you need the entity type machine name to be different from the actual table in the database. This can happen because Drupal only allows entity type machine names of 32 characters. So it is possible to have a database table name that is bigger than that. So then you need to do something. So you could put the full database table name here in the base table, and then have a different entity type name here. Label property is the column in the database that stores something that can be used for a label. Like in contact, we use display name. So if you just show the label of the entity, it will show the display name. In this case, we use the campaign name column. Just so if like you have your listing of things that you can see it. So these are like these are the labels right here. This happens to be the event title column that is used for that, but it can be anything you want. So the way Drupal does this is it just says print out the label. And it doesn't, if you're coding these things, it doesn't necessarily look at the column in the code. So it does in the deep, but okay, so then you need to set some permissions. What do the users need to have as far as permissions to access the Drupal view pages or the Drupal edit forms or the Drupal delete form? So if you don't put anything, it's just administer CiviCRM. So it's a pretty good safety. Like if you're usually only given administer CiviCRM to people that can get in the back end of Civi and therefore are administrators or something. You can put your own Drupal permissions in a module and use those, or pick from any of the amount of permissions that are available. And one way to look and say, okay, what permissions, what's this name? If you just look at the permissions page, it's kind of cheating. Open up your developer console and then click on one of these names right here. And then you'll see right above it says edit permissions, administer blocks. So it's just the bit after permission. So it's administer space blocks. And that if I wanted to use that permission, I could use that this hook and set that right there. So other people in the wild have used this and added their modules. Civi Booking is one, and you can see here's an example of their hook implementation to get it going. And you can see it's fairly simple. So the Civi Booking is an extension that provides some additional entity types in CiviCRM, and they wanted the Drupal integration so they could get the views, and they implemented this hook to do that. So, okay. Cool. So you can do a lot with that. Adding and removing, modifying these. Now you've got your view pages. Maybe you want to allow, let's give me an example. So maybe you want some particular, maybe I want to make some contact pages public, but I don't want to make all of them public. Right, and now we've set one permission for all view pages, but maybe that's not enough. Maybe we want administrators to be able to view something and anonymous nothing, and mix it up. You know, because maybe you want to access content or some permission for organization types. Maybe you always want organization types to be visible, and you want nothing else visible, no matter what their role is, not even if they're administrator. So you can do that. So if I go here now, this is contact 3. It's an individual contact. I'm an administrator, but I'm getting access to that. So now I've altered the access control for this to change it. So I made it so that only organizations are visible. An organization could be visible to anybody, even anonymous users. So this is really quite simple to do. I've implemented hook entity type access. There is also a hook access or hook entity access, but I like to specify the entity type because you usually only deal with one entity type. So when you implement a hook, you replace the word hook with the name of the module, which in this case is CiviCRM_entity development demo. Then I have the entity type, CiviCRM contact, and then access, and then you can refer to the documentation for the parameters that are passed to this hook. You have an entity object, you have a string of the operation, and then you have the account object. This is the account that is trying to view the contact in question. So somebody goes to this page. This is the entity. It's going to load this entity with ID 1, and then my user, which is ID 2 or 3, and then it's going to run through the logic to see if it can do this. Notice that these entity interface, account interface, they're more clearly defined. The namespace up here in the use section, so use Drupal core session account interface. And then after you use that use statement, you only need to type the name of the object. So in this case, okay, I wanted, if the operation is view, and then I'm looking at the entity, so if there is a value to the content type, it's good practice just to check to see if there is something there. And then if that value is organization, so if content type is organization, then I'm gonna allow, no matter what, it's allowed. And no matter what, if it doesn't meet that condition, it's forbidden. So that's what throws the access denied. And then maybe maybe in your logic and what you're trying to achieve in your module, you don't care. Like you could just be neutral. You can say, I'm not making a decision. It's just neutral, not saying yes, not saying no. Other modules can decide what happens in those cases. And so then we're just basically letting the defaults apply. And because the access control is set up and coded in CiviCRM Entity module based on the metadata in supported entities. But in this particular module, I'm not trying to care. I could write another module, somebody else could write another module that makes a decision about other operations for the CiviCRM contact. So that is that access control. Now, I thought, well, you know, it'd be kind of cool. What other uses? Why would people do this? There's another case that people often do is what if you have a maybe we want to have the logged in users linked CiviCRM contact have a relationship to the organization, and only if you have that relationship do you have access and otherwise denied. So I put a little code snippet together so we can just change that. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go in here. So now we can just say, like, maybe this operation is still pertinent for the organization. But we want to do an extra check. Do they have a relationship? So we're using our service that we described in a previous slide, CiviCRM API service. And then I'm getting the UF match. I'm querying the UF match table. This is the table that links contacts to Drupal users. Right. So now I'm going to pass it the account ID, which is the ID of the logged in user, or the person or the account being checked for this access control. If we find a match and there's a contact ID value, then we're going to look up and see if there's a relationship. And so we're going to take that contact ID value for contact ID A, contact ID B for is the ID of the organization that is being viewed. So it's just, you can just use the ID method. And if there are some relationships found, and maybe we want to do active. Yeah, that still works. That's great. False. Probably need to see now I've denied it because I have a relationship to the organization, but the status is true, not false. As soon as that I didn't query and find any relationships, that it gave me access to none. So anybody viewing these organizations, they must have this relationship now. And you could go further. You could say you want to have a relationship of a certain type, or you need view and update permissions, or all the other things you could have in CiviCRM to determine that. And you can get as complex as you want. You could have some logic in here that says, well, if you're an administrator, no matter what you can view, but if you're not an administrator, then you need to have the relationship and so forth. Okay, so I wanted that as true, so okay, so that works. So somebody asked a question in the last session, can we do field level permissions? So maybe you're more worried about the actual individual fields of data that are showing on the screen and not the whole entity itself. So we can do that just as easily. So we have organization name. And you can see here that it's not showing because this user didn't have permission, right? So we can have them be able to see the entire entity, but not the so the names field set is disappeared because the only field in that field set was the organization name, and this anonymous user did not have access to view that. This is simply implementing hook entity field access. So it's getting past different objects, parameters. I look to find I'm just kind of like resolving a context. It's like do you care if it's a form, or there are other operations like there's add and update, but they're both a form. So maybe you just want to resolve that as that. So if I'm viewing, and if the field name is organization name, and if I'm not an administrator, it's forbidden. Otherwise, don't have an opinion. So that's that way I'm removing access for any user that doesn't have the role administrator for that particular field. And you can go crazy with this logic just to say. Yeah. So that's some access control. Right. I want to move to a slightly different topic now. How to write plugins and what are some useful plugins to write. So there are many examples of plugins. If you just look in the CiviCRM Entity module itself, we provide a number of different plugins for features that we support. If you always look under source, and then there's a plugin directory. These are all different types of plugins used by different scenarios, like where we need plugins for views, search API, rules, make field widgets, and field formatters, conditions, actions for like views bulk operations, and entity reference selection. So there's this is a good place to go. Like if you want to learn how to do something views, look at a views plugin. And we have many types. So we have access control, arguments, which are contextual filters. When you look at the UI, fields filters, joins and queries, mainly just used by other plugins, and then relationship plugins. So we needed a plugin a number of times just to show somebody's age. So if you look in Civi, on the contact record, there's no age field. It's just birth date. And age, of course, is dynamic. It is how many years since the birth date. So it's not exactly a value that's going to be in the database either. It's a calculated value. So how can we, views is a query builder. It is looking to say, what is this data in the database? And then it's displaying that. So how can we get there? So then this is a view, and I've got my age, and I've got an age filter. So now I've derived the age and encapsulated it as a field that is displaying in a view. And then I only want to show contacts where the age is greater than 0. That means they have a birthday set. If they didn't have a birthday set, you can't derive that age. The age is just null. So we're just going to say, okay, so contacts with age, you could make this anything, right? Age is greater than 20. In this virtual world, I'm 96 years old. So how do we do this? Okay. It's really not that difficult. And I think this is good to illustrate to people because like it's like esoteric knowledge of how to wrap all this up, but the logic itself is really just in one little function. And if you can wrap up your logic into this one place, then you can make any number of these field plugins. And remember, this is calculated too, so it's detached from anything in the database. We're not adding. So when you have a select query, say select column name from table, we're not adding a column name here because there is no column. We're calculating it. So the first thing is this query where this field plugin base, it comes from Drupal. You can tell that by the namespace here. Drupal views plugin field plugin base. So this is just a starting point for any field plugins. So my class age extends that. And I override the query method and just leave it completely empty. I don't want it doing anything about a query. I just want it done, right? So we have also have our CiviCRM API property. This kind of show this in the beginning. When the object is created, we're fetching the API from the container and we're initializing it in the initial. Now, this is the other key thing. You need this. This is a annotation style way to declare the name and metadata for the plugin. So Drupal parses all plugins and it looks for these annotations. You can use attributes now in 11.2. I decided not to do a strictly 11.2 or 11. Actually, in 10.3, you can start using attributes, but maybe your site isn't on that. This works for every site. At some point in the future, they're replacing annotations with attributes. I'm going to call that beyond the scope of today's call. So now, if you were to use this, you could have your own custom module. You could change this word right here. This is the declaring the namespace of this object. You could just change this to your module name. You could change this to some unique identifier. Maybe you change the name of the class. This name of this class here, age, matches the file name. So you can just change these few things, leave everything else the same. And then you could modify the render. This is where it's actually like, what do I display as HTML for each row? You can see this is past the result row. So this method is going to be called for every row that is in the result set of the view. And we didn't actually need the API service here. I just left it in because just to kind of show you how to do it. Because if you wanted to make CiviCRM API calls here and do complex, like does the user have a relationship of a certain type or whatever, you could put it and then you want to display something like yes, user has my special type of relationship equals yes, and then you want to show that yes, then you could do that logic in here. In this case, the entity, the Drupal version of the entity object is available to you. And I'm just looking for the birthday. See here that we're using some CiviCRM objects. This is the same, like there is, like you saw on the context summary page, there is the age calculated and it's put on the context summary page. So this is the exact same way they do that there. And then we return that, and that's how we get this value of 96 for this row right. So really kind of simple, and I hope you can imagine like all the things you can do with a calculated views field. Like, so if you can't get what you want in that view, you can calculate it and put it in here. Do be mindful. There maybe are caching considerations. Like, do you want to invalidate caches? Do you have caching in your view? Maybe if the birth date changes, you need to invalidate a cache. A little more advanced topic, but some things to consider there. And if you turn off caching for the view, obviously you can don't have to worry about that. And just be mindful that there could be a performance. So like when you get the birth date, it's just getting that value from the database. It's not calculating anything. Here we are doing a little bit of calculations. So imagine if you're doing several API calls. Each one of those is doing its own query. Let's say you have 1,000 rows in a view. That means you may be doing many thousands of API calls, and that can get a performance hit. So I wouldn't necessarily do this if I needed a view result set with 1,000 or 1,000,000 records. Do that a different way, but super handy for 10 results at a time if you have a pager, or for a view that's for a member dashboard that's just showing information about that one contact. So maybe just one row. Similarly, added a filter So here there is actually a bit of a query being added. Okay. These, if you, this is a numeric filter is a base filter plugin that is provided. So it's a little more is added on. So in the previous example, we had just a um, the field plugin base, like nothing extra other than just the bare bones of what it takes to do a field plugin. Here we're doing a little more than the bare bones of the filter. We're doing a numeric filter, which is the same as if you have a numeric field of any kind and use the filter, it uses this plugin. So we're just kind of using the same functionality that's in Drupal for our case, and we're just modifying it a little bit. So we didn't want a regular expression filter operator, so we just removed that. So we can manage what operators we're handling here. And if you look in, dig into this numeric filter object, and then you can find out that it maps operators to methods. And this is where the actual query is updated for. So here, this query says, you imagine a view, it may have 14 filters, whatever. So this query object is passed around to each one of these plugins and lets each plugin modify that query a little bit. In most cases, just adding a where condition, right? So here we're just adding an additional where condition. Most of this stuff is just going to be the same on every, there's you can have filter groups. Those are and or groups. It's great. So you can just add that. And then you add your bit of the where condition, right? So this is just converting that birthday to a timestamp difference. And then for mins and max, we're doing the same basic thing. So a good example of how to add a filter. And again, if you're looking to develop things, just look at how all the other filters and how the other plugins work. And then that's a great way to learn how to do your own thing. You will find between the API, let's go ahead and api.drupal.org. Between this and ChatGPT, you can do it. Every bit of code for Drupal 11 is in here, except for some of its dependencies. Symphony. All right. Page plugins. All right, before I do the next thing on the slide, I do want to point out the VBO because it's really simple. The views bulk operation module, which I didn't document. This lets you add actions so you can take so that you can do certain things when your view listing. So if you're listing a set of contacts in a view and you want to be able to add those contacts to a group, then we need a views bulk operations. So you can make your filters, do whatever. Maybe you want your age is greater than 96, so anybody that's over 96 is going to get added into a group. Great, and you can do that. Now, CiviCRM Entity comes with a views bulk operation action, which is the add to group action. This was literally put in here to show as an example. And again, it is not hard. This is what I was talking about. This is the attribute way of declaring metadata for the plugin. This is the annotations. We did both, so it works in any version of Drupal. Do note that the attribute method is the way forward in the future, and the annotations will be deprecated. It could be Drupal 12 or 13, though, maybe a little more. So there's a lot of code in here, but really at the end of the day, when you're adding somebody to a group, you're just adding your group contact record, and that record stores the contact ID and the group ID. So it's really quite simple. And if you copy and paste, change the namespace, change this stuff, change this to the name of the file, dig down into where the execution is happening, and make your own API calls. You can make your own Civi related views bulk operations very, very easily. We do have a configuration forms, so like build pre-configuration form. This is when you're adding the bulk operation to the view, the administrator can set some options in a form. So maybe the administrator says, well, we only want to let our people using this view add context to these 10 groups, not all 100 groups, but just these 10. And that's where that's limited. And then somebody using the form, this build configuration form, and it passes the selection of what the user selects to the execute method. And we just had a couple of helper functions to provide that, fetch the groups, fetch the titles. The access is plenty good. If you're whatever, this basically here was just saying that the access required to use this action is the same as being able to update the entity that we're listing. So for listing contacts, this VBO is for a contact, and you must have the same permissions to update a contact. You need to have the permission to update the contact to be able to use this views bulk operation, which you can modify in your book entity access. So this how to add a group. And then this one here was just another example. And this is tag a contact. So instead of adding a contact to a group, you're just adding a tag to a contact, same thing. I think between these two things, definitely reason out fairly easily how to make these VBO actions. And yeah, it's not bad. Okay. Now I did want to touch on theming a little bit because it is a really great reason to use CiviCRM Entity, maybe especially once you get into controlling your access and now you want the public to see some of the data. That could be events, contacts, again, whatever, but maybe you want to do a really custom theme, maybe that managing the fields, changing the, so if I go to here, so like maybe there's more that you want to do that layout builder can't do, or you're managing these fields, which ones show field formatter, but maybe you just want to go nuts with it, right? And do completely custom things. So how can you start to do that? So really just need one thing, but two things if you want to do things. So here we go. I forgot to put this just in. Shit. You can see what I'm seeing. So I just made one gist, but I have an overridden twig template and an example of the pre-process. So I'm gonna actually show this in my code editor though. So I'm on this template. Now, if you look in the CiviCRM Entity code base, there is a basic template. And it does give you a little bit of help as far as how to name things. So you can see up here, the file name is CiviCRM-Entity-contact, CiviCRM-contact, and then full, which is the view mode, except it's confusing because you want to use the full view mode, even if you're using the default for the default display. So whether you're configuring default, use this name full, but all other view modes are normal. Use the name of the view mode. So like here I have layout demo, like the name of the view mode. And if you actually look right here, so you change underscores to dashes. And so this full would be replaced with layout dash demo. Anyway, so this is where you want to add your own HTML structure or whatever. I put this in, show you my theme here. So I've got a custom theme. It's a custom bootstrap theme, sub theme of bootstrap burial. And so I've just copied the original, and you can look at the original. It is here. Templates. Just copying this. Notice in here, this guy, you can do the form template too. So I just copied this CiviCRM-entity.html.twig and change the name. And then I could start this. It's all very much the same, except for now, maybe I want a big header. You do have to clear the caches after all these. So I can flush the caches. And I'm not gonna do something, I guess, super cool or whatever. I just want to just like, this is how you do it. All right. So now that got in my template and everything else the same. Now, to use sometimes field groups or other things don't quite work right with just the template. And if you find yourself in that scenario, here's a handy little code snippet. So I'm implementing a pre-process hook. So it's like as all the variables before they are processed to become HTML in the Drupal render pipeline. Simple little bit of code here, loading the view builder of the entity type manager for my entity type. And maybe I wanted to use the default configuration in the full template. This is the entity object. It's there available for you. So this thing, if I remove this thing, then it'll just output the fields and it won't have like the field groups. So you just need that to kick in some of the more extra functionality. So I hope that helps people start on their theme journey. Okay, I've talked for 50 minutes, so I think that is the presentation. I do appreciate everybody coming. If there are things you want to learn about, feel free to hit me up in Civi Mattermost, Jack Rabbit Hannah. I have some ideas for future things. I'm looking at Search API. We use it quite a bit. And I'm thinking about maybe demonstrating that. So Search API builds search indexes. And if you have 1 million contacts and you want to build super fast searches, building a search index and maybe like Apache Solr is the way to go. So I could describe that. I also thought about rules, some other things. I have some other ideas too. So we'll just see. But we will definitely be posting about future webinars soon. It's a lot of information. If there's any questions, let me know.